Hello friends and neighbors. Well, it's been over 2 years since Hatter and I started doing books versus movies reviews. The reviews have evolved a lot since then. I moved to another bookshelf, Hatter moved to the other side of the television, our hair is longer, the video clips don't look like crap, and we actually appear in the same frame now on occasion. But more importantly than all of that, we approach reviews differently now. Some of the rules that we established originally have either been tweaked or abandoned completely. And it's fair to say that if we were given the chance to do some of the early reviews again, we might approach them a little bit differently. So I thought, why not do it now? In celebration of our first 30 episodes, as well as the first 2 years of us doing this, and also compensation for the fact that I'm not at VidCon this year, sorry. Before we get going with our official third season, Reg and I would like to take another look at 3 of our early books versus movies reviews that, if we were given the chance, we'd like to do over again. Now, it's important to note that the overall outcome of these 3 reviews will not be changing. If book or movie won the first time around, it's gonna win again, and the overall score is not going to change. This is basically a do-over. A chance to do justice to a review that maybe didn't get what it deserved the first time around due to our inexperience. And before you ask, this is not going to become a regular thing. This is likely the only time we're going to do this, so please don't ask us to redo another review for you. Trust me, these are hard enough to do once. With that said, let's get started with our redo of our very first Books vs. Movies review, Roald Dahl's last and possibly finest work, and the Danny DeVito film based on it, Matilda. I should mention that my main reason for wanting to do a do-over for this review is a Little London musical that's also based on this story but has no relation to the movie. And when I say little musical, I mean musical that was nominated for every Olivier Award that it was eligible for and won 8 of those awards. I mean, this musical is pretty freaking huge in London, and rumor has it that it might be coming to Broadway next spring. And I suppose there's no point in putting this off, so... Cassie?
I'm here.
Okay, Cass, let's get a couple of things straight here. You understand that the original outcome of the review is not going to change.
Right.
The musical's not going to win.
Got it.
Because technically we haven't even seen it. We've only listened to the cast recording.
Yes, got it. No love for musicals as usual. Let's get on with it.
Okay. Well, round 1 looks, as it did before, at our main protagonist and title character, Matilda. Like we said in the original review, Matilda is portrayed in both versions as sweet, charming, mature, and very intelligent for her age. She's basically the sort of child that any parent should want. Except that her parents don't want her. In fact, a number of people in the story seem to be working against Matilda, apparently not realizing that they basically have a child prodigy on their hands. In the movie, she's portrayed by Mara Wilson, whose acting is sort of... meh. I mean, she does alright, but she's not one of the strongest child actors I've ever seen. Still, the movie does a pretty good job of showing us her intelligence, showing us how she's able to take care of herself when her parents neglect her, and most especially showing us her voracious love for reading. The main problem with movie Matilda, as I mentioned before, is that she doesn't have nearly as much common sense. I'm not going to go so far as to say she's stupid, because she's not. She's just a kid, and moreover, she's a kid who hasn't really had the chance to learn the ropes of what you're supposed to do when you're a kid. So it kind of makes sense that she would call Trunchbull out on the newt thing. But still, when the headmistress is clearly hopping mad, why would you correct her on such a small thing?
I just thought you'd like to know it's not a snake, it's a newt.
It just strikes me as being incredibly stupid. Plus, she's just plain reckless. She doesn't think. She goes to Trunchbull's house twice to take things from it. That kind of works, though, given the different direction the movie decides to take regarding the school, which we'll get into in the later rounds. But Matilda has basically taken it upon herself to stand up to the injustices that she faces. So she fights back whenever she sees the opportunity, and most of the time, she fights alone. Her battle against Trunchbull is a very personal one, and she takes a lot more risks. Also, it's important to remember that through it all, Matilda is still a kid. She's gonna do stupid things every so often. But one of the great things about Book Matilda is that she's a strategist. She actually thinks through each of her pranks and knows how to work with what she has. The main difference I get between the two Matildas is a difference in the definition of intelligence. Matilda of the movie is definitely a reader. Pretty much everything she learned how to do she got from a book. And of course she's read a lot of them, but in the movie you get the sense that she really doesn't think for herself that much. With Matilda of the book, though, you get the sense that she eventually grows beyond that and starts starts thinking for herself. In fact, that's where the magic comes from. Where in the movie it's a gift that seems to have been arbitrarily bestowed upon her, in the book the magic is a result of the fact that all of this intelligence inside of her is being squelched by her parents and Trunchbull. And it just kind of manifests into these telekinetic powers that go away as soon as those people are out of the picture. And she only uses her powers a total of 3 times in the novel, whereas in the movie she uses them all the freaking time. Mostly to, let's be honest, show off the special effects. Now she does derive her power from the anger she feels at her oppression, but the point isn't there nearly as strongly as it is in the book. So it kind of seems like the Matilda of the book was definitely intelligent, whereas the Matilda from the movie was just lucky.
Now, like we said, we haven't actually seen this musical. We've only heard the cast recording. But Matilda in this musical leans more toward the book characterization, especially in the use of her powers, which she hardly uses at all. There's a song she sings called Quiet, which really exemplifies this whole magic emerging due to the squelched intelligence thing. She sings about all these things she has going on in her head, from the thoughts she has to the way that her parents and the Trunchbull oppress her. She also sings a song called Naughty, which acts as an overarching theme for the whole musical. That theme being that you have to stand up for yourself when things are going badly. Also, Matilda's played by 4 adorable British children, so there's that. As far as book and movie go, though, I have to side with Reg. The movie tried to capture that aspect of Matilda's personality, but they didn't succeed nearly as effectively as the book did.
And as good as Matilda is, that's how bad her parents and Headmistress are. So let's take a look at Antagonists. Matilda was raised by the most rotten parents in the world, the Wormwoods. The father is a used car salesman who enjoys making his money by cheating his customers and spends most of his spare time watching television. And the mother is neglectful, lives only to spend the money that Mr. Wormwood earns, and also spends most of her spare time watching television. The book describes them by first telling us about all the parents who think that their children are the most wonderful things in the world, and then turning to the Wormwoods who think that their child is a blight on the face of the earth. The movie also gives us Michael, Matilda's older brother. He's in the book too, but not really as an antagonist. Not really as much of anything at all. He's just kind of in the story to illustrate that it's not that the Wormwoods hate all children, or even hate all of their children. Just Matilda. Mr. and Mrs. Wormwood are played by Danny DeVito, who also directed the film, and Rhea Perlman, his real-life wife. On top of being able to play the neglectful parents really, really well, they also look, well, quite frankly ridiculous. DeVito is notoriously short, and his wife is, well, not. And this actually is a pretty early and clear indication of the direction that the movie chose to go with the antagonist, at least as far as the Wormwoods are concerned. As I mentioned in the last review, the Wormwoods are comical in the movie in a way that they really aren't in the book. Roald Dahl is whimsical in his writing, don't get me wrong, but there's a dark reality to these parents that really doesn't come through in the movie. Though it's not something that we want to readily admit, we know that these people exist. People that, for whatever reason, hate their kids. There's humor in the book too, but most of it comes from the reaction of Matilda's parents to the pranks. The parents basically exist to say that you should stand up for yourself when you're being wronged, even if you're a kid and even if the people who are wronging you are your parents. In order for that message to come through, the parents have to be authentic, and in the movie, they really aren't. The Wormwoods are pretty much rendered ineffectual by the first third of the story, however, and then we're introduced to a new villain, Miss Trunchbull, headmistress at Crunchum Hall Elementary. And I'm probably mixing up my Britishisms and my Americanisms here, but whatever. Trunchbull is an awful human being. She hates children, and she does things like throw them over the wall by their pigtails and lock them in a dark closet with spikes and nails sticking out of the walls. The movie does a great job of making her seem huge, intimidating, and ugly, with wide-angle close-ups of her face, forced perspective on her size, and the fact that during the first few minutes that she's on screen, you don't actually see her face. But just like with the Wormwoods, I never felt that she was authentic. I mean, she's headmistress of the school, yet she treats children badly for no particular reason, and nobody does anything about this? In the book, it's explained that adults are just as afraid of Miss Trunchbull as kids are, which not only makes her seem much more frightening, but also creates a plausible explanation for why she's allowed to do these things in the universe that Dahl created. In the movie, the explanation is just that nobody believes the kids when they talk about it. Now, where have I heard that before?
Because you wouldn't have believed me.
Your Redux is coming. At least in the book, Trunchbull did actually care about education and discipline and wasn't just there to slap the kids around. She punished the kids when they got answers wrong or they acted out, which they did often, as we'll discuss in the next round. But if they did well in school and they behaved themselves, she usually left them alone. This makes it seem like she's actually there for a reason, which again makes her more authentic. And I realized that I went with movie last time on this, but looking at it again, I'm not so sure. The movie villains are shot great, really giving us a child's perspective on something scary, but they're just a little bit too cartoony and caricature-like for me to take them seriously. And don't get me wrong, caricature-like characters are kind of Roald Dahl's thing, but he still managed to make them seem authentic, which is kind of necessary for a story about overcoming adversity.
The musical, again, did something of a combination. The Wormwoods are funny, but more in a it's funny because it's true way. We get a pretty clear indication of what kind of people they are in the opening song, Miracle, which includes both the ridiculousness of Mrs. Wormwood not realizing she's 9 months pregnant, and a good example of the kind of verbal abuse that Matilda suffered for most of her childhood. I also love that they speak with a markedly different and clearly more lower class accent than the rest of the cast. And Trunchbull, like her book counterpart, is in Crunchum Hall for a reason, and in this case, it's mostly about the discipline. Again, a legitimate reason for wanting someone to be headmistress of a school. Also, she is played by a man in drag. And there's ribbon dancing. It's a win. Ultimately, I think Reg is right. Image and meanness are all well and good, but it's authenticity that sells these villains.
And then we have all the other characters. Most of the other characters are the kids at Crunchum Hall, but we'll start with the other pivotal character in this story, Matilda's teacher, Miss Honey. The two characterizations are very different. Miss Honey in the book is fearful and timid, and at one point she even admits to being a coward. When we learn about her backstory, however, it's no wonder, as she was basically raised by Miss Trunchbull, who it turns out is her aunt. Miss Honey is kind of a cautionary tale for Matilda, as if to say, if you don't stand up to the people who oppress you, then you'll be like this for the rest of your life. At the same time, however, she has a passion for teaching that she has the courage to pursue, despite the fact that it means working under her aunt. Not only does she feel the need to teach, but she also feels the need to protect the students in her charge from the cruelty of Miss Trunchbull, and she's very blunt about warning them what Trunchbull will do to them if they mess up. Movie Miss Honey, though she has basically the same backstory, is a little different. The timidity is still there in the face of Miss Trunchbull, but she is a much stronger character than her book counterpart, and actually does stand up to Miss Trunchbull on a couple of occasions. You get the sense that she overcomes her fear in this movie more than her counterpart in the book does. The downside of this is that she's not as much of a cautionary tale, but I do like the implication that it's never too late to stand up for yourself. So really, either characterization works for me. What really decides this category, though, is the kids at Crunchum Hall. Three of them feature fairly prominently in both book and movie. Lavender, who ends up being Matilda's best friend, Hortensia, an older girl, and Bruce, who is forced to eat a giant chocolate cake. Like you do. What you sense with these three characters, as well as the other kids in the school, is that they are an oppressed and defeated people. Until Matilda comes along and offers leadership in taking down Miss Trunchbull. The book, on the other hand, treats Crunchum Hall as more of a war zone. The students here are already fighting Miss Trunchbull when Matilda arrives. Hortensia, for example, is completely different in the book. Rather than being a girl who's just been toughened by experience, she's compared to a soldier with battle scars and victories under her belt. Lavender's prank with the newt, which in the movie is just a spur-of-the-moment thought from a child who's frightened that her best friend is in the chokey, in the book is a carefully planned operation inspired by the bravery and the fighting of all of the students in the school. And Bruce in the movie is struggling and ready to give up when he's trying to eat that huge chocolate cake, and it's only when Matilda stands up and starts cheering him on that he finds it within himself to finish. In the book, however, it's the fact that he is still eating that leads to the cheering of the students, which incidentally does not include Matilda, who from all indications is just a silent observer to all this. There are advantages to both characterizations. The movie characterization makes the battle between Matilda and Trunchbull more personal, but the book characterization makes Matilda's power more universal. It basically comes down to personal preference, and mine is still for the characterizations in the book, basically for the same reasons as last time. I prefer the more universal message of power in the book, where Matilda is just one fighter among many who kind of struck the final blow in the battle, as opposed to the leader who inspired a following. I mean, think about it. In the movie, the other kids only only really fight when Matilda eggs them on, or when she's already weakened Trunchbull to the point where she was gonna leave anyway.
Now, it's kind of hard to tell which direction the musical went based on just the songs. For Miss Honey, they definitely went more in the direction of the book characterization, but it's kind of hard to tell which direction they took the kids. In School Song, it definitely feels like they're going for more of the oppressed people position, but in Revolting Children, it really feels more like a war zone. At any rate, I agree that both characterizations have their merit, but the kids in the movie are kind of annoying, so I'll go with the book on this one.
And now the imagination of Roald Dahl versus the imagination of Danny DeVito. You'd think that this would be a no-brainer, especially given that I've said twice now that the imagination of Roald Dahl is limitless, and the imagination of Danny DeVito seems to involve a lot of wide-angle close-ups. But let's look at this a little bit more closely. Roald Dahl has a very whimsical style of writing, which you wouldn't think would work for a story that's basically about parental abuse, but he manages to strike that balance between silliness and seriousness, a balance that authors like Louis Sachar, J.K. Rowling, and Lemony Snicket have also managed. There's also the matter of how magic is portrayed. In the book, it's never really the focus of Matilda's character, whereas in the movie, it's basically there to show off the special effects. Especially that scene in the middle, which really serves no other purpose. But as long as we're talking about the effects, let's talk about the effects. Aside from that one scene, the effects in this movie are remarkably simple. They're basically the reason why movie won imagery the last time, and that really hasn't changed. I especially love what they did to make it look as though the chalk is writing on the chalkboard of its own free will. They put a magnet inside the chalk and then had somebody stand with the other magnet on the other side of the board and write the message on the board backwards. That kind of creativity in the effects is always impressive to me. Plus, the wide-angle shots of our villains make them seem much more intimidating and huge, and I really like how they use forced perspective to make us feel like what it feels like to view things as a little kid. I mean, let's face it, it's no easy task to make Danny DeVito look tall. Admittedly, they do go a little overboard with just how much magic Matilda uses, but that's more of a story issue than an imagery one. And really, this story is based more in the real world, and so there's not going to be as much boundless imagination as there was in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Also, once again, narration done right. DeVito, as the narrator, introduces the main theme of the story pretty effectively in the opening sequence, and the narration is never intrusive or annoying. In fact, it kind of feels like someone reading a story to us, which is fitting for a Roald Dahl novel.
It's hard to talk much about the imagery of the stage production, never having seen it, except for clips online of Trunchbull as a man in drag and the use of giant swings in When I Grow Up. So, instead, I'll talk about the music. I'll let Scotty talk about the music.
Thank you. I talked about this musical in passing during my vlog on musicals, but the music here really is quite excellent. Somehow the music manages to capture the whimsy of Roald Dahl's writing. It's the kind of music you'd expect to hear when reading one of his books. And the lyrics use a rather loose rhyming style. They're not usually exact rhymes so much as words that sound similar, but it works mainly because the lyrics don't sound stifled with the need to use exact rhymes. And the songs, especially Miracle, Naughty, and When I Grow Up, give us the themes of the story really pretty effectively. And songs like Loud, The Hammer, and Telly give us good characterizations. Quiet's probably one of my favorites because it really gives us that feeling of what Matilda's going through with all this intelligence being bottled up inside her and starting to boil to a critical mass. And School Song, well, I'm not going to give anything away for that one, but let's just say it's bloody brilliant.
As far as the book and movie are concerned, I agree with Hatter. The simplicity of the movie's imagery is enough to earn it the win here.
Well, it's not tied up like it was before, but we'll still finish off by talking about story. You may have noticed that aside from the one round, my opinions on Matilda, book versus movie, really haven't changed that much, and story is no exception. The main difference between Matilda the book and Matilda the movie basically boils down to whether the victory of Cruncham Hall belongs to all the students of Cruncham Hall, or just Matilda. And this gets into the difference of the students that Reg was talking about. In the movie, the students are pretty much beaten. There's very little rebellion in them, and the little that we do see is invariably led or inspired by Matilda. What I like about this is first that the battle between Matilda and Miss Trunchbull is more personal. But more importantly, we get to see Miss Trunchbull actually lose control of her students. When Matilda stands up and starts cheering Bruce on during the cake-eating scene, Trunchbull is clearly at a loss as to how to respond. In the book, we really don't see her lose control. In that same scene, when the students start cheering, she just quells them with a glance. In many ways, that makes her defeat at the end much more satisfying. In the book, the students were fighting long before Matilda got there, and her role is basically to give that final push in a long-fought battle. The advantage to this is that the power that Matilda demonstrates in defeating Trunchbull is the kind of power that any kid anywhere can have. This idea that any kid can and should be able to stand up for themselves, which is also illustrated in the explanation for Matilda's powers. The movie doesn't really explain the powers, they're just kind of there. It's implied that they're kind of an extension of her natural brain power, and that she's able to tap into them through her anger and fear of the people who oppress her. That's similar to the book's explanation for them, but it's kind of an oversimplification. In the book, it's theorized that Matilda's power comes from the fact that even though Matilda has all of this intelligence, she's not allowed to use it to its fullest potential because her parents don't want her to seem smart, and her headmistress will not allow her to move forward a couple of grades even though she easily could. So she doesn't tap into the magic so much as she learns to control what is already leaking out of her. And when she is allowed to use her intelligence to its fullest potential, those powers fade away. This implies, though it doesn't directly say, that this sort of power could be available to any child who is in a similar situation. And that this kind of power exists in every child, not just the lucky few who happen to receive it. And finally, there's the ending, where the book shines and the movie goes downhill. The movie ends with Matilda basically beating the crap out of Miss Trunchbull with her powers, and the other children, it should be noted after Trunchbull has already been weakened and defeated, drive her away from the school. In the book, she just leaves, probably because Matilda's pretending to be the man that she supposedly killed is giving her a guilty conscience. The movie pretty much devolves into what I called the kids rule, adults drool type of movie. This is an idea that was very popular in the 90s. This idea that children can and should be able to wield power over adults. All adults, not just the ones who treat them badly. And what bugs me about this is that almost without fail, they do this by behaving, well, childishly. In contrast, Matilda from the book defeats Trunchbull in a much more mature and intelligent way.
And the musical goes pretty much in that same direction, with all the children fighting against the Trunchbull in the only way they know how. In one scene, the Trunchbull is trying to get them to misspell a word in a spelling bee because if they do, she gets to put them in the chokey. But Miss Honey has taught them too well, and so she has to resort to making up words for them to spell. And after that, the students start to purposefully misspell the words because they know she can't possibly put all of them in the chokey. And the song Quiet that Matilda sings illustrates the source of her powers really effectively. The musical then would seem to handle the story in the same mature way that the book did, rather than devolving into the immaturity of the movie's ending. Though they're both meant for children, the book seems considerably more adult than the movie, and thus, just like last time, tells the better story.
And that's how Matilda would have been handled differently if we did it today. Stay tuned over the next couple of days and we will give you 2 other Books vs. Movies Review Reduxes. Until then, I'm Regular Matt. That's weird. Now anyway, they're the Mad Hatter and Cassie, and we'll see you next time.
Now, I can't promise she'll be very forthcoming, but...
Thanks, Cass. This won't be long.
Hatter, what can I do for you?
First things first, Cassie tells us that you've given up trying to take over the review. I just want your assurances that you aren't going to try anything funny.
Not to worry, Hatter. I've moved on to other things. Better things. Your little genre trick did its job well enough. I'm satisfied with the occasional cameo.
Alright. Secondly, expel a review us. It didn't just expel us from the review and split us into Matt and Hatter, did it? I think there's more to it than that. I think it split us into multiple personas, and Reg and I are only a part of it.
You forget. I was creating multiple personas of myself long before you even knew what YouTube was. I underestimated the spell's power.
How many?
I don't know. 7 seems like a pretty likely number, but you shouldn't bank on that. Anyway, you'll know soon enough. They'll be coming. They'll be looking for the source.
The source?
Your scattered personas have the desire to be one. Though they don't understand why, they're drawn to the source. The one who holds the key to being The original Matt.